Our next somewhat obtusely named exam objective has to do with managing site coverage, and I think I mentioned earlier that I honestly have no idea what Microsoft means here, other than just do a good job at making sure that your sites are indeed covered. I will use this as an opportunity to show you a couple of the other configurations that you might miss in here, not the least of which is these sort of curious NTDS site settings here, and then NTDS site settings objects that are attached here to each individual site. So there are a couple of places where you can kind of get lost in here, and I just want to point them out so that you should be aware of them. I also show you that in addition to managing your sites, there's also a couple of other things you have to be aware of for what goes inside that site. And it's important to recognize that when you create multiple sites, you also have to have domain controllers that go in those sites. Creating a site without a domain controller gets you absolutely nothing because you've got no DC to replicate content into. Furthermore, there's also the need to determine whether or not the domain controllers that exist in that site are going to be global catalog servers or not. Back in the old days, it was a recommendation because of the extra resources required to host a global catalog to make a limited number of global catalog servers exist on your network. But these days, because processing power is so just really over the top, actually the current best practice is just simply to really just make every single domain controller a global catalog. You can do that by viewing the properties here of NTDS settings on the individual domain controller. Making sure that every domain controller is a global catalog server is important because it actually takes a global catalog in order to accomplish some very important tasks like dealing with Exchange. And actually the logon process can require a global catalog server as well. In fact, if you take a look here under the NTDS site settings, you'll see a universal group membership caching option here, which is a configuration that will allow a domain controller to actually cache the universal groups, the domain's universal groups onto itself to speed the logon process when clients don't have very high speed access to a global catalog. You can just turn it on and then refresh the cache from some other location, like the headquarters location or the other sites once we get those completely configured. This is also something that comes into play when we're dealing with Exchange as well. But again, these days, more often than not, you find every single domain controller is also a global catalog as well. The other setting that can be a little easy to miss happens up here under, I believe it's under the server actually. If I view properties of the server, yes, right here. Each individual domain controller has to exist in a site. And it is common actually to find multiple different domain controllers to exist in those sites, particularly if you have a problem with the occasional loss of network connectivity with the rest of your network. If I have more than one domain controller in a site, it may be useful for me to try to, again, kind of tailor down the amount of network traffic that needs to exit that site for replication by defining a preferred bridgehead server. And all this means that of the DCs in that site, this is the server that we'll use for taking the changes to Active Directory in our site and forwarding them on to the site link that we've created. You actually make this server a bridgehead server by selecting the transport and adding it over here over the right-hand box. However, it's generally not a good idea to actually ever configure any of these. And the reason for that, back to my whole knowledge consistency checker service, the KCC will automatically create or determine a bridgehead server on your behalf as it goes through its pass of figuring out the topology. So there's really no need for you to do this except in the case where you absolutely have to determine which server is going to be that bridgehead server. The general best practice is to never ever touch this because you want to let the KCC perform that on your behalf.